time ago, whilst glancing through a book, something caught my eye. It was just a short passage that wasn't even the main theme of the book. I'm not even sure if the author intended it to have the impact that it did on me. But because it stuck in my mind, it led to a few other thoughts. The passage in question referred to a documentary that the author had recently viewed on labour-saving devices for the home that had been developed in the 20th century, and the accompanying advertisements for these devices. The particular device in question was the sewing machine, and the manufacturer, in addition to extolling its virtues, direct virtues that is, also left the open-ended question: what would the housewives do with all the spare time that they would have as a result of using this machine? These days, with store-bought clothes being so cheap, very few people will still be using the sewing machine to make clothes for the family. Those who do use sewing machines tend more to use it as something to occupy themselves in all this saved / spare time. For me, the greatest labour-saving device for the home that came out of the 20th century is the washing machine. These days it's just so easy to throw your clothes in, put in the required amount of detergent, set the controls and leave it. But just going back through my life, I remember one of the earlier washing machines that my mother had, which incorporated a spin dryer. Just to operate that, on the first spin you had to be there to feed the warm water back into the main washing tub, set the timer for each spin, a separate timer that is, it wasn't a time spin, add the required amount of water and put it through another spin cycle, probably 3 or 4 in total, to make sure all the soap suds had been removed. Well, of course, we know that now all that is automated. At the same time as this machine being used in our home, I still remember visiting my grandparents and watching my grandmother do the wash. She still had a wash tub, a washboard, and a thing called a posser, which rather resembled an inverted colander with a long pole attached so you could pound the clothes up and down. This was quite a lengthy operation, even though it was aided by the rapid development of the laundry detergents which came about during the 20th century. From documentaries that I've seen recounting life 100 plus years ago, laundry day really was laundry day. With a large family, the lady of the house would be busy all day with the laundry, and it quite often meant pulling the girls of the family out of school. So we can see how much work it was. We only have to look around the home to see how many powered gadgets we have to make life easier. Again, I've seen elderly relatives using the hand whisk. So much easier now with a motor on it, but the hand whisk did its job. Of course, recipes changed slightly because of the development of these tools. But life is possible without the powered tools, even though it might take a bit longer. But even with all these so-called labor-saving gadgets, people either complain that they don't have enough free time, as they call it, or that they just don't have enough time. But when I just sit back and think for a moment, because some of it boils down to time management. I remember an experiment that I read about in which a group of men and a group of women were given a list of tasks to perform, and they wanted to see who would complete them first. The tasks were such things as vacuuming the carpet, preparing a meal, and doing the wash. The ladies finished much quicker. Why? Because they were able to analyze the tasks, see which part of one task could be done whilst the other one was going on. Whereas the men tended to do one task and then go on to the next and then go on to the next. Maybe it says something about the different way in which men and women think. But either way, we can all learn from the advantages of multitasking in order to complete tasks in a shorter time without wasting time. But it's also some of these 20th century inventions that in many senses one can say they waste time. Just think how many hours some people might spend just sitting on the sofa, not being able to get away from the television because of the so-called great programming. Now, that's not to say there aren't good, educating and informative programs on television, but the whole format is designed around drawing people in, keeping them there, with the aim usually of exposing them to the maximum number of commercials, which of course is the revenue source of the TV stations. But you also have to think about it in a deeper way, because the Romans had a saying that to keep people happy, you have to give them bread, and a circus. Maybe not just literally bread, but a person who has a full stomach and is entertained is generally a much more passive person. They let the Romans do whatever they wanted to do, just as long as they were content in life. One other amongst the many developments of the 20th century is the way time management has been turned into a science. Manufacturers not just developing the production line, but the way people will perform that work. Objects that need to be assembled are best put on a work table in a certain manner so that it can be done quickly and easily. All forms of automation, of course, will take away a lot of the drudgery of the manufacturing process. Sometimes these come about through great thought of people who are paid to do that task. Other times it's people who are performing the tasks will progressively find easier and easier ways of performing them. Little interesting story that I read one time was concerning the development of the steam engine. In this case I'm talking about the stationary steam engines that preceded the use of this as a means of transport. The steam engine was used initially for pumping operations and powering factory machinery. And to keep everything moving along smoothly, someone was employed, usually a young boy, who had to pull on a lever at a certain part of the operation. Well, one small boy was a bit smarter than the rest, and he noticed that each time he was supposed to pull on this lever, a certain other part of the machine was always in the same position. And he figured out that by tying a piece of string to this moving arm, he could then have it move the lever, thus enabling him still to sit there, but basically to stare off into space. Obviously an engineer must have noticed this and incorporated it as a permanent feature into the steam engine. Well, these days we don't have to worry so much about operating steam engines, but we can still apply all forms of time management to our own lives, because whatever happens, we all still have just 24 hours in a day. Still leaves us wishing that we had more time, but there are those who seem to fill the time with passive pursuits, such as watching the many soap operas that television churns out. But also I seem to run into people all the time who, when they wander into places that I work and have worked, I'll ask them how can I assist them, and they respond with, "No, I'm just killing some time waiting for the boss." Sometimes I'll quick back, "Gosh, I wish you could save time in a bottle and use it later." But it does make me wonder why they aren't using that time for something productive. It all depends on the individual what they could be doing, but if you ever hear anyone moaning, oh, never have time for reading a book, well, in such a case the simple solution is to always have that book with you. When a spare moment arises, sit down and read it. A few years ago I found myself confronted with the problem that there were several podcasts that I found that I wished to listen to, and was bemoaning the fact of not having enough time to listen to them. Till a friend suggested to me, well, why not buy an MP3 player and listen to them in your otherwise free time? Upon finding a player that suited a price point that I liked, I found just from the time I spend walking to and from work and on breaks, I could listen to 2 hours of material a day. Even with that, I find I draw the balance between the learning and the ones that are generally informative. Find as well, with every new invention that comes along to save time, there's also ways that you spend extra time with it. I still marvel when I look back at the school typist who would type out examination and test papers, because she didn't have the advantage of the word programs that we can get now for any computer. She had to visualize what the paper would look like, how to get all the text and diagrams onto the required number of sheets. Of course, these days with these word programs you can shift them around at will, add a word, add a sentence, take out a sentence, whatever you want. That's it. Cut, paste, clip, transfer, whatever you want to do. It's all done in a moment. But freeing up time with other things, for me, is also good because of the time that you can take on with other challenges. I'm still amazed how people much younger than me will come for help because they have no grasp of technology, but usually use the excuse, well, I didn't learn that in school. But even when I point out that there weren't computers when I was at school either, it's all part of a thought process of tackling a problem and finding the solution. Even the going out and buying the camera that I use for these videos, I find it isn't just the issue of making a video so that people can hear me talk about something. It's the challenge that's connected with the editing, the uploading, etc., etc. You might call that just the value of mental exercise. But either way, to sum up, don't just complain that you don't have the time for anything. Time is something that has to be found. I was listening to an interview on one of these podcasts one time, and an author and lecturer was being asked about a new project that he was embarking on, and was asked how he found the time. He gave the answer that busy people can usually find time for something. It's the people who aren't busy who always think that they never have the time. You might wonder how that is so. I'll give you an example of one of the many times that I went back to school after leaving high school. The first homework assignment that we were given was to draw up a weekly table of how we were going to be allocating our time, and especially how we were going to incorporate the homework schedule. Their point being that if you just try and fit homework or any new task into the remaining time after you've done everything else, you probably won't have time for it. So it's a case of drawing up priorities. If actually physically writing it down helps you, then that's always a good idea. In fact, most people are helped by having a physical chart in front of them. So these tasks can be prioritized, they can be carried out. In some ways it would be sad to think that one would reach the end of the list, because that might mean that you just can't think of enough things to do. But the main thing is to accomplish the most important tasks, work down the list, and that also leaves a great sense of accomplishment and removes the complaint factor of, oh, I wish I had the time for this. So we'll wrap it up with just suggesting that prioritize your time. Think about the priorities of the various items within that time, and then set about trying to accomplish these goals, and then seeing the satisfaction that comes with using time profitably.